Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. The national championship game is set. Washington, Michigan, taking a deep dive into this matchup and taking a look at some keys to the game for the Michigan Wolverines. Now, for the Washington fans, we had a separate episode talking about how Washington wins this game. Now we're focusing in on the Michigan Wolverines. Couple matchups, couple keys for Michigan to get this one done, become national champions. Really excited to get into this one. Before we do, just want to say thank you to you guys. There has been an overwhelming amount of support over this college football season. We have a blast doing these. Can't thank you guys enough for all the support. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. More importantly, would love to hear from you guys in the comment section on what your keys to the game are for the Michigan Wolverines. Dill, I'm going to kick this one off to you, give you the tee box here. How's Michigan get it done against Washington here?
I mean, there's one very obvious one that I think most teams haven't really been able to do all year is play on their terms and avoid getting into a track meet. And in every big game Washington's played, they've jumped out to big leads, and you can just see how difficult it is to play Washington once they kind of get there, because then you got to start pressing on offense. They never waste possessions. But you've seen times like Oregon and Texas, frankly, at times in those ball games, were able to start establishing playing the way they wanted to. They just couldn't really sustain it for long enough and had too many penalties and negative plays. But I think if you can do that to them and run the ball and have long drives, I think you can be successful.
I think this is by far the biggest talking point of this game. And you can talk about all the different matchups between Michael Penix and the Michigan pass rusher, Will Johnson versus Rome and those Washington wide receivers. This one comes down to how this game looks to me. Like when you look up at the final score, you don't even need to show me the final score. If you show me the time possession, Michigan's rushing yards, that'll give me a good sense of how this game went. And I think you said it perfectly. Like if you go out and try to beat Washington in a shootout, it's not going to end well for you. They've been burying teams doing this all season. And you look at how Michigan matches up, I think it's pretty favorably, because how does Michigan like to win these games? I think Joe Class said it's like a python, right? It's just grinding down teams. And that's exactly, if you're Michigan, how you want this game to be played. Establishing the run. The best way to, and I've said this countless times throughout the season, the best way to stop Michael Penix is not letting him touch the football, because that is an offense that is extremely hard to stop on a consistent basis. But if you limit the amount of times he gets to touch the football and go on those 8-minute drives, chewing up clock, that's the best way for Michigan to win this football game. So when you talk about key matchups, I mean, yes, we'll talk about some of those, but I think it comes down to Michigan playing their style that's been extremely successful for them all season long.
And ultimately that starts and stops with running the football effectively. And again, you've seen Washington give up rushing yards to teams that want to go run physical with them. That first Oregon game comes to mind. Obviously, Texas ran the ball pretty well when they did it. It's just the negative plays and the penalties they were taking.
Texas got into exactly what we're talking about not getting into, right? They go down a couple scores and then they try to start matching Washington and getting into that shootout vibe where you look at their running backs, they average 6.4 yards per carry with their running backs. They just didn't get to go to it or didn't stick with it because they got down early.
Because you're right, like the penalties and that's what Michigan can't have on offense is negative plays and penalties, because that's ultimately what derailed Texas. And I get it was Washington scoring for sure, and that put a lot of pressure on them. But if the way you stop that is you need to have the ball, and Texas just didn't sustain drives because they didn't commit to running the ball. And I don't want to say didn't commit, but ultimately.
No, they didn't commit. I would 100% agree with that.
Washington forced them out of it, and that's what Michigan really needs to avoid. They can't take penalties. They need to be on schedule. Michigan's done a really good job. I feel like they haven't taken a lot of penalties at all this year. And if they can avoid that, I think they should be able to kind of do what you're saying to do and stay on schedule.
And if you're optimistic and excited about one thing, it's Michigan they're not going to deviate from that. I mean, we've seen it almost to a frustrating extent, running the ball pretty much every single play in the second half of Penn State. Like, they will run the football. They will stick to what they want to do. Sharon Moore, Jim Harbaugh. Michigan's 13th in the country in time possession. Washington allows 4.5 yards per carry. That's 82nd in the country. I mean, those are the matchups that you need to exploit if you're Michigan. Dill, the next thing that I've noticed, and we talked about this a little bit heading into the Alabama game, you got to play to your matchups. And we went into that Alabama game saying, I'm not sure how much Cornelius Johnson and Roman Wilson are just going to win their one-on-one matchups with guys like Terry and Arnold and Kool-Aid McKinstry from Alabama. And to their credit, I mean, they made some plays out there for Michigan. But you look at Washington and their playmakers they have on defense, and their best player on defense in my mind outside of Braylon Trice is cornerback Jabbar Muhammad. And he's another guy that I don't know if that's the matchup you're trying to get after. So when you're looking at where does Michigan potentially match up well, we said it going into the Alabama game. I still think it exists in this matchup. I mean, Colston Loveland. And you saw JT Sanders, the tight end for Texas, go for 6 catches for over 70 yards in that semifinal game. You want that stat line looking like that for Colston Loveland in this matchup as well.
Yeah, that's a big thing. I think that's the one guy you really can't probably go after is Jabbar, but you kind of look, I mean, they're giving up a lot of pass yards on the season. I think they're down at the bottom of the list, and a lot of that comes, I don't know if they're as complete in that secondary. I think if you can get Colston Loveland on safeties like Texas was able to do with JT Sanders, I think you should get favorable matchups there. I mean, you saw Tez Johnson work the slot really effectively in that second game against Washington. So again, if you can kind of get these safeties and linebackers in coverage, that's where you've seen things break down a little bit for Washington. And if you can attack those matchups, again, it's not even like Michigan's best kind of assets are on that edge. And Roman and Cornelius are obviously fine players for sure, but Colston Loveland's the man. He's by far the best pass target in my mind on this Michigan offense, and he's got to have a day. I think we thought he was going to have it against Alabama. Alabama obviously is a bit more complete on defense, a little bit harder to find your matchups. But against Washington, I think he's got to be involved.
I think that's the biggest difference is there wasn't, like going into that, there wasn't too many matchups where like, all right, we like our guys here because they got 2 first-round NFL draft picks in Terry and Arnold and Kool-Aid McKinstry. You look in the slot, Malachi Moore, he's going to be an NFL dude. You look at the safeties, Caleb Downs, the best true freshman in America. There weren't too many matchups in that passing attack where we looked at and said, yeah, we like our guys there.
But when they got them, when they were able to get linebackers on their cornerback or wide receivers too, on corners and running backs on or linebackers, I should say, like that Tyler Morris play, that's the type of play you need. If you can find that, you got to capitalize on it. And again, that's another thing. Michigan's kind of like had their moments of like you wish they took more advantage of when they had those moments. I thought they did it enough against Alabama, but you can't let them go to the wayside. You can't miss that throw. When you get that matchup, you got to take advantage of it and make big plays like they did, I think, against Alabama.
And I think and you mentioned Tyler Morris, so we can just move on to this next key here, and that's making Washington tackle in space. And that's something we said Texas needed to do against Washington again. I feel like Texas let that game get out of hand in terms of how they wanted to play it. They got away. They trying to turn vertically down the field as opposed to kind of how Texas likes to operate on offense. Though Michigan hadn't really shown a ton of scheming up guys for yards after the catch on the year. They did a masterful job against Alabama with a lot of those mesh concepts. And Alabama wants to play man coverage. And how do you beat man coverage with some of those mesh concepts and working some traffic over the middle, leaking out Blake Corum multiple times, leaking out Roman Wilson for a touchdown? That's kind of the stuff that you look at Washington and where they've struggled. Yes, they've given up 3,700 passing yards on the year. Still, 1,800 of those have come after the catch. This is not a great tackling defense in the back end. And that is where you have some guys who can make some noise, right? You saw Tyler Morris take 137 yards to the house. Samaj Morgan, although had a tough game against Alabama, is probably one of our more electric players with the football in his hands. Can you make
Washington? Frankly, I think the running backs got to be involved in the passing attack too. Even what Texas did, throwing some of those screens in there, they obviously had a lot of trouble stopping those screens. It was, again, Texas was just some negative plays, but there's things you can do against this Washington defense. I think you think back to like what Seoni Vaki did against them. It's like if you can get your favorable your ball carriers with the ball and get them on these corners and safeties, they just haven't been a wildly consistent tackling team. And that's where I think, again, Michigan's got 2 very good weapons. Blake Corum, really good catching on the backfield. Donovan Edwards might even be better. You got 2 guys to do it. I want to see them involved too.
I agree. Now, some of the most successful plays that we ran, one for the touchdown and obviously one to get that drive going late in the fourth quarter, were leaking your running backs out, getting them the football in space. Now, Dale, on defense, if we had the answers to stopping Michael Penix in this Washington offense, I personally wouldn't be in my basement talking into a microphone. But we're going to give it our best shot here. And the first thing I think you got to talk about here is finishing pass rushes. Like, this is a Washington offensive line, specifically on the inside, that we thought Texas would have the massive advantage to. And to credit Washington's offensive line, they won the Joe Moore Award. This is a very, very good group. They played well against Texas, but Texas was able to manufacture some pressure. They just weren't able to finish those pass rushes. And you have to give a ton of credit to Michael Penix and how he manipulates the pocket, moves the pocket, and keeps his eyes downfield and delivers strikes, gets the ball out really quick. But Michigan, I mean, what they did against Jalen Milroe in terms of finishing their pass rushes, not only getting pressure on Jalen Milroe, we kind of knew we'd be able to do that, but can you get him to the ground? Michigan did a phenomenal job. Jalen Milroe, the most athletic quarterback in all of college football, I think maybe got out of 2 or 3 sacks all game. I mean, for the most part, Michigan did a phenomenal job getting him to the ground. Michigan's going to be able to get some pressure against this Washington offensive line. You got to be able to finish the job.
And I think that also kind of comes with being able to get more than one guy winning, because you kind of saw with Texas, like they'd get a guy here win his individual matchup, but I don't think you saw enough like 2 guys winning, or like what you kind of saw from Michigan against Alabama was pretty much the whole defensive line smothering. Exactly. It's like you saw some guys win their matchups against Texas or Washington in that game. But again, I don't know that Texas has the edge play that Michigan has. I don't know that they're as complete on the defensive line in general. And that'll be the thing I'm looking for. It's not just like, can one guy win? And if you win, hopefully you can make the tackles, get the sacks. Because again, you give up 3 sacks, and that's kind of what I counted for Texas. 3 easy ones, I thought, just by not making tackles. That's game-changing kind of play when these
100%. How do you get Washington off the field? You got to manufacture some negative plays. You got to keep them in those 3rd and long situations. And Michigan's been extremely good all year doing so. This will be a game where it is vital for Michigan to finish those pass rushes. Now, Dill, one of the things I'm looking at here, and again, Texas, you saw Texas at points win up front, but like you said, they just didn't finish. The inside of Washington's offensive line is probably the unit most Washington fans would say you're less comfortable with. They got 2 NFL caliber guys at that offensive tackle position. They're a little bit undersized. They're probably they're just not as good in the middle. Now for Michigan, Mason Graham. I mean, he's arguably the best interior defensive line pass rusher in the country. Kenneth Grant, Chris Jenkins. Can you get those guys to win? Because that's the matchup where I'm looking at. That's not saying a guy like Jalen Harrell or Brady McGregor or Josiah Stewart can't make it happen from that edge spot. But if you're looking for a matchup to get after, it has to be that Michigan interior defensive line getting after Washington's middle guys.
Yeah, and they'll have their tasks set out for them, I would say. And
yes,
they'll need to play really well, because again, we kind of talk. I think Washington did answer a lot of questions against that Texas team. And I know they gave up some pressure. It didn't look like a dominant interior offensive line, but it was really solid. You saw Brailsford go up one-on-one with some of those big D tackles. And a question we all obviously had at him being only around 280 pounds or so.
You got to give him a ton of credit. Like when he was lining up head on Tavondre Sweat, who goes probably 350 pounds.
He was battling and wasn't getting – I mean, he definitely didn't say he got dominated. So, again, Michigan's got their work cut out for them, but I think it's a more deep. I think it's a little bit more athletic, frankly, in that unit. That's going to be a big part I think you got to be looking for, is they need to have a day.
That's a really good point. Athleticism. Like you can disrupt the pocket, but are you athletic enough to have the closing speed and bring a quarterback to the ground? I mean, guys like Tavondre Sweat who go 350 pounds don't really have that. Like Chris Jenkins carries 305 pounds, about as good as I've ever seen. Mason Graham. Kenneth Grant moves extraordinarily well for his size. So that athleticism on the inside actually is a pretty good point to bring up. Now, the last key, and again, these are kind of some obvious ones, but again, you look at where Washington has had a ton of success. They have had a ton of success pushing the ball down the field. And you look back to that Texas game, Michael Penix, 20-plus yards down the field, was 6 of 8 for 238 yards and 2 touchdowns. That can't be his stat line Monday night. And to Michigan's credit, I mean, they've been extremely good limiting those explosive plays all year to opposing quarterbacks. The one thing that I'm looking at, I'm not breaking any news saying they can't give up big plays. How do you do it? I think one thing, and we said this for Texas, and I think Texas just doesn't have as good of a secondary as Michigan, but can Michigan stop Washington's run game with the light box and be able to continue to play with those 2 high safeties? Because you have guys like Makari Page and Rod Moore and Keon Sabb back there. That's a better unit than what Texas has. And if you're leaving your safeties too high, can that close some of those throwing windows and some of those opportunities for Washington to push that ball down the field.
And Texas did a fine job with that, but I think you're right. At the end of the day, when you're playing that young, that inexperienced, guys just not getting their hands on footballs when they're in the air. And frankly, there's also a part of it when Washington makes a perfect throw, it's really hard to defend. So again, like Texas was in position. I think Michigan got to get their hands on footballs. That's been one thing I think you've noticed from especially Michigan's safeties. I mean, those two really do a good job getting their hands on balls, not just being in position, but like Rod Moore in that throw to Kendrick Law down the field, like being in position and going up, making a play on the ball. I mean, those are the type of things, again, you just don't necessarily see all the time with Texas. You didn't just only not see it against Washington. It's a young secondary, a talented secondary, but young. Michigan's kind of the opposite. Very veteran, very experienced, has done a good job against Ohio State now for a handful of years where, again, when the ball's in the air, they're going after it. They're trying to get their hands on it. And that's what, again, like that pro kind of level secondary play is what it takes to beat Washington. They're too good to just kind of like, okay, well, if we just play too high, we're fine. It's like, well, you still got to go make the plays because they're that type of unit. And I think Michigan's just got the guys that a lot of schools don't have in that unit.
There's a portion of this game where it just comes down to what Michael Penix plays like. And Michael Penix is going to play good. He put on, in my opinion, after watching that game multiple times, like a generational performance. I mean, I don't think he missed a throw all game. Those balls that he put on, just dropping them in the bucket and what he did in the pocket, like there's an element of Michael Penix, can he replicate the performance he had against Texas? And if he does, it's going to be extremely close game. But you're thinking about ways that you can get Michael Penix off the spot, making him look uncomfortable. And you noted it before we went live that Michigan, with the veteran secondary that we have, we're versatile. And we can play Mikey Sandstrom on the boundary. You can play him in the slot. You can give a lot of different looks and different coverages and different schemes. Are you pressing guys at the line of scrimmage? Are you playing with a 3 high safety, which we have the personnel to do? So I'm kind of interested to see what Jesse Minter cooks up in terms of just trying to get Michael Penix looks and making him a little bit more uncomfortable. Because again, when Michael Penix is comfortable and he's cooking, it is an offense that is almost impossible.
Because you're right. When that offense is really going on time and like their guys are getting the ball before their breaks and those,
it's a timing offense.
It's really hard. So again, if you can mix it up, and again, that is one thing Michigan's got. All the guys in the safety room can get in man coverage if they need to. The cornerbacks, both big athletic guys who can make plays on the ball or play kind of that zone style. I think, again, Michigan's secondary, people keep saying they haven't seen anyone like Washington, yada, yada, yada. Like, I don't think there is a secondary in the nation that, maybe with the exception of Georgia, that has the talent, the experience, the depth that Michigan's gotten. I think that unit, again, if we go back to 21, that Ohio State offense was like as good as we've seen in a very long time. Michigan held them to, what was it, like 28 points total or 24 points, whatever it was. Like they just weren't able to like go kind of up and down on Michigan like I think they were able to do pretty much against everyone else. And that kind of includes Georgia. So you're looking at a Michigan secondary that, again, maybe not totally tested this year. Same unit from last year, very much tested and has dominated the entire year.
It's going to be good on good. I think that's what is most exciting. You're seeing probably the best offense against probably what is the best defense. I think that's what makes this game so exciting for so many. Really excited for this one. Again, can't thank you guys enough for rocking with the boys. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.